Hello and welcome to the Daily Aus. I'm Emma.
I'm Sam.
So Sam, somehow we are now less than 3 weeks away from the US presidential election. It's been a journey.
Wow. I feel like I've aged.
Yeah, me too.
And we're not even in America.
We aren't. Imagine what it's like over there.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what we want to talk a little bit more about today in terms of what this election has meant for young people through the lens of social media and the online world. Let's lay some foundations first, looking at Donald Trump and Kamala Harris both as brands. Can you give me a sense of how these candidates and the massive strategic machines that sit behind them are actually trying to sell themselves to younger voters?
It's an interesting exercise, isn't it, to think of them like a cereal box, and how are they putting themselves on the shelf to position themselves to get a young voter who might not have voted before or might not have turned out to vote when they were eligible last time. So we'll start with Brand Harris. She had a really big job ahead of her because she entered the race late. It was the latest, I think, to enter the presidential race in at least the last 50 or 60 years. She took over from Joe Biden when he pulled out a couple of months ago. Now, younger voters weren't connecting with Joe Biden. They were abandoning the president, not necessarily in favor of support for Donald Trump, but more in favour of third-party candidates or independent candidates, or perhaps just not voting at all and totally disengaging.
Which we know is a big issue in the US because voting is not compulsory, so people really have to want to turn out to vote for a candidate.
Totally. There's kind of two challenges in the US. One is to convince them that they should vote for you, and the next bit is actually to convince them to vote. And so in terms of Brand Harris entering the race, there was one line in an article I was reading that summed it up into 3 categories really nicely. This analyst said she's representing 3 things that young people said they want most: authenticity, actionable policies, and a change from the status quo. Now, it's clear to me that the authenticity element is being presented through her emphasis on her story, her early life, her college days, her family history. She is spending some time talking about climate change and racial justice and other kind of hot young people's issues, or issues we know win young votes. But she's really focusing on these 2 big issues: economic inequality and abortion rights, and tying them very closely to an America that young people want to grow up in. And the actionable side of that is like she's giving lots of tangible plans and, 100-day promises and all of that kind of thing.
It's interesting that you mention these kinds of focuses for Kamala Harris because you could be forgiven for not knowing that there are actionable policies that she is putting out there for this young voter. It's hard to kind of cut through the world of brat summer existing in the context. There has been that memification around this election, but she really does seem to be spending a lot of time aligning Brand Harris with a change from the status quo. That she's not Joe Biden is something she has been saying a lot along the campaign trail. She's trying to really distinguish herself as being a unique candidate away from the older male leader that voters are used to seeing, a change from what she describes as the same old playbook from Donald Trump and his political antics. In many ways, I think she's really trying to make her brand less about her, less about the person, and more about what she represents. What is her identity? What are the policy issues that she wants to drive change behind for young voters and what young voters want from their politics?
Which is crazy, right? Because she's part of the current government. So normally in a presidential debate, you would have a candidate in Harris's position be defending her record and saying not to change and saying that things are great as they are and we need more of it. And so the fact that she's then the challenger is a bit of a weird one for US politics and for the US media. I also want to point out that she's got this message of change and of getting rid of the status quo, but simultaneously, she's also saying that she wouldn't have made any decisions differently from Joe Biden's over the past 4 years. So that's where we're starting to see the conflict within that positioning to a younger voter of vote for me, I'm different, but I actually wouldn't have done anything differently.
Yeah, and that's the defense and the line that we've heard from Trump and JD Vance's camp constantly, this rhetoric of you've had 4 years to show us that you care about this, I suppose.
It's a difficult tightrope for her, definitely.
Absolutely, and a uniquely American kind of rope. I don't think you would hear that kind of talk from an Australian election. What about the other side? We've heard about Brand Harris. Tell me about Brand Trump.
Well, brand Trump is doing what he does best, and that is appealing to a sense of nationalism, a sense of commerce, and he's been very vocal on social media about issues like job creation, taxes, grocery items going up in price, and of course, immigration. It is a more traditional message to younger voters, but the way that he's delivering that message with memes, viral content, and very targeted appearances on youth-centric YouTube channels and podcasts, where he gets a bit more room to express his unapologetically personal brand, that is really resonating with a certain segment of younger voters, especially those who are feeling disillusioned by what they see as a broken political system, and especially young men.
Right. This is obviously a really unique climate that these candidates find themselves in terms of personal brand in the online space. 2020 feels like a lifetime ago, but of course it was an election where a lot of rhetoric played out online in the lead up to that vote. Is there anything we can learn from young Americans from that election? How did they vote then?
Well, I think it's helpful to look at 2020 in trying to figure out what to expect from this year, because all of that social media noise kind of needs to translate to votes. So in 2020, statisticians say about 50% of Americans under 29 actually turned out and voted. And that was up 11% from 2016. So that made 2020 one of the largest youth turnouts ever in America.
I just want to take a moment to reflect on that. Like 50% of young Americans voting being celebrated as one of the largest turnouts ever. That is a staggering number when you consider the voter turnout here in Australia, and I think worth remembering when considering the kind of online zeitgeist, the cultural conversations, what that actually translates into in terms of boots on the ground on polling day is a very different story.
Definitely. And that's why we see so much work being done on the turnout to vote and rock the vote and all of those kind of things just to get people to turn up. So in terms of those who did vote, younger voters voted for Biden over Trump by a margin of about 20 percentage points. It's worth noting that Trump actually gained 8 points amongst millennials, so those who were between 24 and 39 in 2020, compared with his 2016 performance. So there was a little bit of a trend that analysts have been looking at to see, would Trump be able to bring down the average age of his voters? People who vote for Republicans in a presidential debate typically do trend older. So there was interest in that trend of perhaps he is resonating with younger people.
I wonder, and this is, purely speculative, but this notion that Trump gained points among some young voters when he ran against Biden compared to when he ran against Hillary Clinton, I wonder if that tells us that younger audience preferred the female candidate in that earlier instance. I wonder if it was more about Biden's lack of popularity than Trump's increased popularity.
Potentially. I mean, another factor to consider was that Trump was running against a candidate older than him in Joe Biden, and so that might have influenced some people as well. It's hard to really nail exactly what happened on that day, and people's whole jobs are to analyse presidential results for the next 4 years.
Yeah.
And this year's looking just as kind of uncertain in that way.
Yeah, we keep hearing about the uncertainty of this November 5 vote. The polls are extremely close from what we are hearing. So do we have any updated numbers in terms of the younger vote for this election?
Well, I'm always cautious about polls. You and I have had that chat on the podcast before. I like the Harvard Youth poll. They seem to have, over the years, had really quite, at least scientifically executed polling. And they released a poll last month. It shows Harris has a commanding lead amongst Gen Zs. 23 percentage points was the difference there in under 30s amongst those who are registered to vote. Amongst female voters, that gap is nearly 50%. So what we're seeing emerge is a bit of a difference in gender. That's now being accentuated after Harris replaced Joe Biden. There was another really interesting part of this poll relating to memes. So 53% of young adults said they had seen a meme about Kamala Harris in the last month. Of those people who saw a meme, 50% said it didn't make a difference to how they felt about her. 16% said it made them feel more negatively towards her. And 34%, so 1 in 3, said it made them like her more.
Wow.
I thought that was really cool. Then they did the same question for Trump. 56% said they had seen a meme about Trump. 61% of people said it didn't change their view. 26% of people said it made them feel more negatively. And only 13% said it made them like him more.
I think that tells us, and probably unsurprisingly, that there is a smaller pool of people who haven't made up their mind about Trump.
Sure.
He's been in the public eye their whole lives. He had his stint as president. He is now running in a third campaign. So I suppose there's been plenty of time for Americans to figure him out or figure out what they think and feel about him, whereas a lot wasn't known about Kamala Harris until, even the last few months for many voters.
Yeah, and so now the job for both of the campaigns has been, we've built these brands, we've decided what we want to resonate with young voters. Where do we actually show up online to deliver that message to them? And so this is a bit of a pattern now with the Trump campaign, but it's very clear that his focus has been on younger men. So it was 4 months ago almost when he sat down with Logan Paul, who is an influencer and a wrestler, for his Impulsive podcast, and that has been viewed over 6 million times on YouTube alone. Then he's gone on the All In podcast, which is a business podcast targeted at a kind of entrepreneurial tech industry Silicon Valley crowd. They have a majority male audience as well. He's done live streams with one of the most followed Gen Z streamers, Aiden Ross. He's played golf on TikTok with another influencer. And of course, he's had the backing of Elon Musk on X. There's a long list of other examples, but the key theme, to me at least, is that these are all environments where Donald Trump has been allowed to be more himself than a sit-down political interview. There's a lot less structure. It's often not in a studio environment. And I think that's a very conscious effort.
Interesting. And also interesting that the influencers, these kind of tech figures, media figures that he has chosen to interact with are all male, all have very male audiences. So it's as though he's cementing his status as a popular figure amongst the groups that he already has on side, and he doesn't appear to be making a deliberate effort to appeal to anyone who he thinks might have already written him off. So what about Kamala Harris? I mean, she's been all over the internet, all over social media. Speaking of popular podcasts, she sat down on one of the biggest podcasts in the world very recently. Tell me about Brand Harris.
Well, I think Brand Harris is making more use of their own social media channels. So Trump is obviously prolific on Truth Social, his own social media channel, and he's very busy on X now as well, but he hasn't been that active, or at least not compared to the Harris campaign, on more traditional Gen Z platforms like TikTok or Instagram. Harris has really been blitzing it. There's a lot of, collab posts, and there's a lot of tags, a lot of comments on other people's posts, a lot of memes that they're creating themselves. And so there's a lot more use of those platforms. As you said, Call Her Daddy, one of the biggest podcasts in the world. She was on that podcast last week. She invited 200 full-time creators to the Democratic convention to capture content from the convention to really launch that campaign. She's also been very active on late night TV, Jimmy Fallon, Jimmy Kimmel, Stephen Colbert, and they've all got big YouTube followings as well. But there's also been this whole side of the Harris campaign from endorsements she didn't necessarily ask for or go on a podcast to appear from. And we cannot ignore Charlie XCX and Taylor Swift. And in Swift's case, that happened just after the presidential debate concluded between Harris and Trump. There were 400,000 new visitors directly from Taylor Swift's Instagram page to the voter registration portal, and 35,000 of those actually went through and registered to vote. And that was the single biggest day since 2020.
Wow. For anyone who might write off the celebrity endorsement, that is the evidence there of how influential a celebrity can be when they have a say in this campaign. I also think that speaks to this organic reach that Kamala Harris has had as Brand Harris, and whether or not it's as organic as it might look to us on the surface, some of those viral moments, that clip from Fox News or one of the conservative American news outlets where you've got a group of middle-aged journos trying to understand what brat is, and just moments like that really fell into Brand Harris's lap.
And I think they've been very good at owning those moments and really kind of exploiting them or making them internet moments rather than just letting them float by.
Yeah. Okay, so that gives us a really solid sense of what's happening on social media online But as you've kind of touched on, none of that really matters if people don't turn out and vote. So when we're talking about turnout, that really is the multi-million-dollar question. How much can we actually rely on the success of this online content, of this brand building, in terms of predicting who is actually going to show up at the polls?
Well, we can't rely on it. I mean, think about it like this, and this is a really non-scientific way to think about it. But let's say that all of the most successful Instagram content that was resonating with Harris voters was being watched by people in California. Harris has already won California. That we kind of know that that's going to be a Democrat-leaning state. The way that the Electoral College works is it's really going to matter about the young people in particular states. And so it's not helpful, really, to say there's been more successful use of TikTok and Instagram across the board for Harris, therefore she's going to win. It's going to come down to turnout in some of those key areas. Michigan is having a big youth discussion of how are young people going to vote there. There are 4 million voters who are expected to vote for the first time in the US. And if you look at all the voters who could vote, there's going to be 41 million voters under 30. So this is a big group of people. And it's going to matter not about passion, but more about turnout. And maybe it is the young men that Trump is more connected to, even though they're a smaller group of people than the kind of Instagram and TikTok masses of the Harris campaign, that will make the difference. We're not going to know. What we do know is that it's hard to get young people to actually go to the polls on voting day, even if they are registered.
Yeah.
And we're not going to see these efforts die down until, people have actually cast their ballots.
And if it's as close as the pollsters are predicting, we're not going to have an answer within the first hours or days even of polls closing.
Then social media will be really interesting.
Exactly. It's definitely going to be fascinating however it plays out. Sam, thank you so much for your insights. I think it's given us all a lot to think about as we head towards the US election in 2 and a bit weeks. And thanks to you all for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe to the Daily Aus podcast wherever you are listening, or if you're over on our YouTube. Hello, thank you for watching. Make sure you subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss out on our next episode. We will be back with another one tomorrow, but until then, have a great day.